Thank you. Good morning. I'm State Representative Tom Demmer from Dixon. As we look at the fiscal year 23 state budget, Illinoisans should be concerned for two reasons: taxes and more taxes. The budget that Democrats passed this year sets Illinoisans up for a series of tax increases in future years as a result of their inevitably increasing spending at a time when revenues are declining. We've talked a lot about the last couple of years how unusual some of these state budgets have been given the heavy reliance on federal COVID relief dollars. But if we just look at normal state spending, normal state operations for education and public safety and healthcare, normal state spending is growing by over 10% in this year's budget at a time in which revenues are declining, perhaps as much as by 5%, setting us up in future years for a cliff where our spending growth will continue to outpace revenue growth, and Democrats in Illinois, like they have over the last several years, will have no choice but to come back to taxpayers and say, we need yet another income tax increase. Or Governor Pritzker will reboot his effort to try to convince voters to pass a graduated tax amendment that they just so recently rejected. This year's budget appropriates money out of federal COVID relief dollars for Democratic pork projects, capital projects in Democratic-only districts. They've chosen to use federal dollars that came to Illinois to try to help us deal with the economic impact of the global pandemic, and instead have directed those dollars toward capital projects that have nothing to do with COVID in Democratic-only districts. What does this lead to? Well, it leads to COVID relief dollars being spent on those pork projects instead of paying off existing debt that we have in our unemployment insurance trust fund. What happens when we have debt in the UI trust fund? Well, two things. There's a tax increase on every job in the state of Illinois, and there's a benefit reduction for every worker in the state of Illinois. They chose to prioritize pork projects over the best interest of Illinois jobs and Illinois workers. Additionally, in this year's budget, we see hundreds, literally hundreds, of dedicated line item appropriations to projects that came at the request of Democratic-only legislators, to groups and organizations across the state who never have appeared before any committee of the House or the Senate, who have never made public requests, who have never talked about how those dollars will be used. We have hundreds of examples of directed line grants that simply say to go to this organization for operations. Whatever that means, the state has no ability now to tie that to any performance metric, to try to reach any specific goal with it. It just says to operations. There's no oversight, there's no check, and there's no balance. These are the kind of budget games that Illinoisans are rightfully cynical about. This is what happens when a budget gets put together at the last minute, passed in the middle of the night, and Democrats need to include this kind of pork in order to buy off the votes they need to ram through another partisan and gimmick-filled budget. I think Illinoisans should rightfully ask, do we want Illinois government to be set up for an inevitable tax increase in the future? At a time of record inflation across the country, is it wise to spend taxpayer dollars on pork projects used to buy off votes for members? I think most Illinoisans would say no.